Right. Welcome to Fine Print, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Caleb Teskey, and today I'm joined by Lou Rinaldi from the National Craft Cannabis Coalition in Connecticut. Lou, thank you for your time today, sir.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
You are my first not my first out of state. There's been some other guys from Connecticut that are up here growing and stuff, but I'm trying to branch out a little bit, and you seemed like the kind of guy that might be able to add to the conversation that we have going on here.
Yeah, for sure.
At the beginning of every episode, I ask my guests to share a 5-minute life story and tell us a little bit about your background, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I'm kind of a legacy custody in a sense. I was never a grower. I was always, that white suburban kid trying to cop, something that wasn't just straight brick. That had been my experience and sort of the extent of my experience with cannabis for quite some time. Was in and out of it for years. Finally ended up becoming a medical patient in 2019. And I had missed a lot during the gap of, when I had not been involved. Like dabs became a thing, concentrates became, well, at least on the East Coast, you know what I mean? It really didn't gain a lot of prevalence, until much later. But I was studying data science at UC Berkeley around the same time that I became a patient. And I wanted to find a way to sort of connect those two things and maybe find somewhere at their intersection that was interesting. And I started to do some data analysis in Python of the public data that's made available by the Department of Consumer Protection, who is the state regulator down here in Connecticut, data related to the medical program. And I got into that, looking at things, what they would provide at the time, which was basic stuff, THC content, terpene content, that sort of thing. Nothing about microbial testing, nothing about heavy metals. So I was kind of wondering, well, where is all this stuff? And then I learned what a certificate of analysis was. And then I started trying to chase those down from the 4 licensed producers that we have in the state of Connecticut for over 50,000 patients.
Wow.
All MSO owned out-of-state corporations, by the way, but I digress. Started looking into, well, where's the rest of this data? How can we incorporate the rest of the data from the certificates into the public data portal? And the interesting thing there was I couldn't get any traction, so I had to familiarize myself with the state's Freedom of Information Commission, which has been a godsend. In fact, the 2 things that I'll always say to anyone looking to get involved in the advocacy space: familiarize yourself with your state's freedom of information laws, and then make friends with an investigative journalist who's not afraid to speak truth to power. Those are the two things you need in your toolbox if you're going to make any kind of real substantive forward progress. So started in with the FOIA complaints, requests that eventually became complaints because they weren't acted on within 30 days. And one by one, I started unveiling, bits of malfeasance and, some shady dealings in the medical program.
How many of these FOIA requests have you filed?
I filed a total of 4, I think. And 3 of those 4 actually bore some very interesting fruit, including what by their own attorney's admission is hard evidence of incompetence and negligence on behalf of one of the testing labs here in the state, which has yet to face any kind of reprisal for that. DCP and their attorneys are aware of it. The Attorney General is aware of it because I reported it to him personally. The governor is aware of it. Nobody seems to care, though. Nobody wants to talk about it or address the issue. So I've now made all of those FOIA responses public. Anybody who wants to can get a hold of them and see for themselves. There's a lot of redaction, though. Heavy redaction.
Could you tell us the nature of the 4 requests? What information you were trying to get?
Absolutely, yeah. So kind of gets me back into the timeline story. So I started by asking, hey, can we please get all the certificates of analysis? Because it's not like they weren't available at all, but it was sporadic. The cultivator would have to make them available on their website, and then it was sort of like a crapshoot of how much they kept up to date with it and whatnot. So my thinking was, hey, we already have a public data portal for patients. Let's incorporate this patient data into that portal and, you know, cut out the middleman kind of thing. So that was the first request. That was implemented a little over a year ago, in August of last year. And what that allowed for was now anybody, any patient could see all the details, the full unredacted certificates of analysis for each product in the program. And that's what I talk about when I refer to the Pandora's box, because that's what led to the next level of digging deeper beneath the surface and seeing just how much was actually going on here that no one was talking about. So the second request, let me back up a little bit. I noticed after seeing some of these certificates that the labs were giving passing grades to products that had total yeast and mold count in excess of what the regulations stated at that point in time. And I'm thinking to myself, how can this be a passing grade when I'm looking at the primary source document right here that tells me it's supposed to be 10 to the fourth power colony forming units per gram, and I'm seeing stuff with higher numbers passing. So I ask those questions and I get back, oh yeah, well, you know, there's some change. There was some kind of a change made, you know, just, you know, take our word for it. It's passing the test. It's fine. It's fine. Just shut up, you know? So I FOIA'd, you know, please show me any sort of documentation of a formal change in the lab testing standards. And that's where we got into the whole, oops, the state actually did it in direct collusion with one of the labs by private emails, didn't tell anybody, didn't tell the program board of physicians, the doctors who they brought in to work with the program. They didn't tell them about this. They didn't tell patients about this. They didn't tell caregivers about this.
Now, is this in the legislation? Are these limits for yeast and mold? Is that built into the legislation down there?
So it's funny how they implemented it. At least at that point, they had it sort of as a not an absolute definition in the regs, but rather a pointer to the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, you know, to say USP section blah blah blah, where they talk about, you know, standards for flour. Whatever it says in there, that's what we're going to go with. So it was a reference to a third-party document, and that's where they had some squishiness in terms of how they interpreted. They were trying to say that it was most appropriate to use the standard for boiling cannabis flower in hot water, which I don't know anyone who consumes their cannabis that way. Even people who infuse tea don't do it that way, you know?
What?
Yeah. So long story short there, the FOIA request came back on that one. I finally was able to find a really high quality investigative journalist who sadly is no longer covering cannabis, but is working on equally important things like housing issues. So this journalist finally published December of last year in a major media network about, you know, what was going on, how the state had done this behind closed doors. And that was sort of when the ball finally started rolling. I had been working at it for about 2 years at that point.
No
and
shit.
Ever since then, since December, it's hard to imagine. It's been 9 or 10 months. It's been an absolute whirlwind in terms of stuff that's happened since then. But that was really the catalyst for the whole thing, was publicly exposing that the state had colluded with one of the labs to tamper with those standards. So that was a big request. The next big one that I went after was there's been one product recall in the history of Connecticut's medical program, which is over 10 years now. And that recall was of a Curaleaf product. And I know, big surprise, right?
Wow, there's my shock
see your eyes popping out of here.
Yeah.
Whoa, what?
Crazy.
Yeah. So the issue there is, the only reason it even came to light is because the director of one of these labs mistakenly rubber stamped a failing batch and had it shipped out to the dispensaries. So only because of that, the self-owning, basically, what did it get any sort of exposure whatsoever. So I remember at the time, you know, there was a little bit of talk about it, nothing too serious, because they did actually inform patients about that one. So the news did cover a little bit at the time. But I always wondered whatever happened in the aftermath of that. Like, what were the consequences? What were the, how did they decide that they were going to change things going forward to prevent that from happening again?
If I had to
And that's
guess,
how I got into
there were no
content.
consequences.
Yeah. So one of the functions of the Instagram CTMMP data is that for a while, I was kind of serving as like a whistleblower clearinghouse. So if somebody who worked for one of the MSOs locally or was involved with one of the labs or something had some evidence that they wanted to surface without having their name attached to it, they would give it to me, and then I would chase that down and try to do what I could with it. So one of the folks that I spoke to during that time was an employee of the lab in question who told me, you need to FOIA what happened in direct response to this Curaleaf recall.
Would you care to name this lab?
The lab is Altasci Laboratories. The director, from what I've been told, I don't know this for a fact, but the director doesn't even reside in the state.
I was going to say, I've seen a lot of these sort of franchised labs that have locations all over.
Mm-hmm. I got quite an education in lab testing, lab shopping, dry labbing, all that sort of stuff. And that's a whole other story.
What is dry labbing? Could you explain that real quick?
Dry labbing is basically just passing something without actually doing the test. Okay. Yeah, like, yeah, sure, we looked at it, it's fine, it's great, go ahead, ship it. So interesting stuff there. When I did request that, I said, please give me all full correspondence documents pertaining to the Curaleaf recall, the slate recall. So that's another thing I'll mention real quick. Here in Connecticut, we don't have real strain names in the medical program. We have a bunch of fake pharmaceutical sounding names that you then have to consult another resource to translate that to the actual strain name, because boomers can't handle Alaskan Thunderfuck or something,
Oh yeah, and there was some ones that they were talking about up here, like ice cream cake. They're like, aren't kids gonna like that? It's like, it's the name of the fucking strain. Yeah. Anyway,
give me a break.
Carry on.
Meanwhile, we got all kinds of like pink lemonade vodka.
I know, dude. Whipped cream, birthday cake vodka.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. It's this New England latent prohibitionism that just creeps and poisons the mind. But coming back from that Curaleaf FOIA request was a massive document, something like, I think it was like a total of 90 pages, and about 70 of them were fully redacted.
Jesus.
But the really interesting thing was, at the bottom of all these endless redactions is a message from the regulator's attorney, which says, the above supports the allegations that Altasci Labs has been party to negligent or incompetent work. So that, to me, is a pretty damning statement coming from the regulator's own in-house attorney. And a year has gone by, and we've heard nothing about this since. So I have since been in contact with the governor and several members of our state legislature, providing the FOIA responses directly to them and saying, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what this says and what needs to happen here, because Connecticut really does need a dedicated cannabis control commission or some sort of cannabis focused regulatory body.
You don't have a control board down there.
No, it's DCP, it's consumer protection. So it's the same people who do recalls for like salmonella or like romaine lettuce problems, that kind of thing. They're handling cannabis. And because Bayer Pharmaceutical wrote the rules for our medical program, it's this very like faux pharma vibe. Every dispensary employee has to hold at the bare minimum a pharmacy tech license. Even a bud tender has to be a certified pharmacy technician with a license. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. They really have pumped that up because they call it the gold standard. They say, oh, other states are jealous. The Board of Physicians met in October of last year, and one of the doctors like couldn't contain his glee. He's just like, I'm so happy to be involved with this program because it's, other states are jealous of what we're doing here. I'm like, they don't even know.
True. Really Connecticut might be the one state that Vermont has been laughing at a little bit here.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that what we have in common with y'all is
THC
the potency caps on concentrate.
What's it set at in Connecticut?
Well, adult use isn't even live here yet, but I think it's capped at like 60. So,
Boy,
you
maybe
know,
you guys got the same consulting firm down there.
yeah. So what are you going to do? What is the other 40%? Is it just filler? Is it just like biomass? Like what? You know, I don't know. I'm real curious about that myself.
Well, they were
But
proposing a 15% cap on flour here too. It was unbelievable. This was
15,
the Vermont Medical
15.
Society, which is a group of, doctors that you have to. This is really drives me nuts because they come in here with these ridiculous fucking arguments, and you have to take them seriously because they're doctors.
Yeah,
But it's like
yeah,
you're talking about THC caps right now. Like, where is your scientific basis for this decision? It
yeah,
doesn't exist.
yeah. It all feels so arbitrary. And it's like so much else in this program. When you realize what is really motivating the people in positions of power who have their hands in this stuff, it starts to make a lot more sense as to why would you care so much about X but not about Y. You know what I
Sure.
mean? And it's all about what motivates these people and what's in it for them and how they've been sort of manipulated by different forces in the industry. And it's a sad state of affairs down here, because one of the other things that they've done pretty successfully, I might add, is divide the activist community, and sort of drive wedges in between different groups of folks, and it's real tough to watch. I've been
How
just as
so?
guilty.
Could
you
you
know
sort of give an example of sort of how they make that happen?
well, I think one of the biggest issues right now is because of the way that social equity was implemented down here. There's I think like 12, possibly more, active lawsuits against the regulator for denials of equity joint venture partnerships. So what that is basically an MSO finding someone who meets a certain demographic description. You have to be from a disproportionately impacted area. You have to have lived there for a certain amount of time. The way they determine that is by percentage of cannabis convictions or something like. There's a whole formula and a map involved. And so all these MSOs found, basically fronts, people who they could partner with, put them out in front and say, no, this isn't us, this is them. But they also worked it out so they can buy those folks out of their ownership stake within 3 years. So is it really true ownership if you're referring someone back to the worker class after a few years? So the folks who got denied their licenses, the MSOs want some kind of a return on that investment, and the venture capital. I shouldn't just say MSOs. There's private equity in the mix. There's VC money in the mix, quasi-public VC money in some cases. So they want to get a return on that investment. So if you bet on a horse who got denied their license, you still want to recoup something for that investment. So now some of these folks have been deployed, so to speak, weaponized. You may not be able to get us a license, but you can at least dilute and confuse and sow fear, uncertainty, doubt in the community, trying to drive people apart. There's a radio show down here that runs out of New Haven called Cannabis Corner. And a few weeks back, they had a whole panel discussion on there where everybody was taking shots directly at me by name.
I had this in my notes here, something about an on-air takedown or something.
Yeah. So they had one of these folks that I just described who's partnered with Acreage Holdings and was denied their license, but not at the time. So at the time the show aired, it was assumed to be like a foregone conclusion that this person was going to get a license. So everybody's trying to glom onto that and ride the coattails. And yeah, that person led the charge, called me out by name. All this ridiculous stuff, accusations of racism, and I supposedly own a mansion and all this crazy stuff. And it's that's sort of the textbook example of what I'm referring to. Is these people are out there, they're pissed, and I don't blame them, because they were sold a bill of goods by these investors, and they trust in the attorneys that were working for these MSOs to get their applications right and get them submitted so that they could pass, and it didn't happen. So yeah, they're pissed, but they're still trying to get paid, so they're going to do whatever the handler tells them to do. So it's that kind of thing. there's also, you know, the more typical, like the more basic human motives, like seeking recognition and validation, what we call clout chasing nowadays, that sort of thing. I'm trying to distance myself from all the bickering and whatnot, because frankly, there's just too much work to be done. There's too much stuff that needs to happen. And that's why I've been really focusing on, you know, ways to move the needle forward in a measurable way, rather than continuing to relitigate these same tired old, you know, petty disputes in the local community here. There's just so much more that can be done that we don't need to be wasting our time on that. So that's been my own personal take. I'm done trying to punch down. You know, I'm looking upward and onward at this point.
Yeah, and you know, I've had a lot of that. I've taken a lot of phone calls in the last 7 or 8 months. Most of them have gone pretty well, but sometimes it's just people hitting me up with, "Hey, this guy ripped me off on a half ounce 5 years ago," and it's like, don't care. It's not that I don't care; it's that I can't. I'm like,
that was a hard thing for me to tear myself away from, because for a while I felt like it was incumbent on me as someone who had this platform to try to mediate every single dispute that was brought to my attention. And it took a tremendous toll on my mental health. And I eventually had to pivot to where I'm telling people now, you got to find your voice. You know what I mean? Air your grievance directly to the party in question, stick to the facts, and give specific examples of how they can make it right if they are willing to do so. You know what I mean? We can all handle our business like adults, and we can, all this petty stuff and all this shit that goes on for weeks and weeks and months could all be put to bed immediately if people would simply take accountability for their own wrongdoing and, you know, be willing to be a little bit vulnerable. I think that's part of why I've gotten such traction, is because I'm not afraid to call myself out. I'm not afraid to hold myself accountable. It sucks sometimes and it takes me a while to get there, but I even acknowledge that too. I'm like, hey, it took me way too long to get turned around on this thing, and I'm sorry about that. I'll do better, and here's how. You know, I take for granted that not everybody thinks that way. Not everybody is wired that way. And it's really unfortunate, because there's a lot, we're so far behind in Connecticut. Yes, we're a relatively immature market. I mean, it's really still the pregame show down here. We don't even have even a hybrid adult use and medical retailer open yet, but it's still so much more that we could be doing that we're not doing because we're too distracted by bullshit. And it's time to get past that, you know?
And don't you think, like, to your point about them sort of driving a wedge in between people, like, I sort of feel like that is by design. They kind of just sit back and let everyone squabble and go out of business slowly, and then wait to just gobble you up when you're broke.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're going to see, I mean, I think this is more of an issue with more mature markets like a Michigan, for example, but we're going to continue to see a lot of breaking down, you know, these smaller players into constituent parts, and, you know, vultures picking the bones clean. And then I think next year is going to be the year of just outright failures of some of these companies. It's crazy. It's a really desperate time right now, and almost no one is willing to really talk about it plainly, in terms of the different economic forces at play here, national pricing trends based on supply and demand, and other sorts of economic factors. It's tough to try to make things better when we can't even swallow our pride and ego enough to speak plainly about the state of play and what's on the chessboard right now, and what are the current rules of reality. It's still working from this point of view that the MSOs have of, well, you know what, we'll just keep throwing money at the problem. The licenses and the real estate are what really matter. We need to just be positioned properly for when the switch magically flips and all of our problems are going to go away. And they're able to sell investors on that to a certain extent. But I think you're already seeing a lot of this in Canada, where the jig is up. You know what I mean? 80% of the cannabis that's produced in Canada, I think I heard on the legal market, ends up in dumpsters. You know, it's unbelievable to think about that. Absolutely unbelievable. Stuff that's intended for, you know, for retail sale, that much of it ends up in the dumpster. And we're not far off if things continue on the path that they're on. We absolutely have to carve out a way for small, independent craft producers, craft growers, craft farmers to be able to thrive and make it worth their while to be in this business. And that's one of the things that I've been focusing on lately with my involvement with the coalition, is to try to help get a representative voice at the table. Because again, Connecticut is still in the dark ages, but we're fighting to get a craft tier of the market created, a caregiver tier that is more equitable and more truly accessible by everyone, not just the connected few. But once we have that, we're going to need some, we're going to need representation at the federal level, or we're going to get bowled over the same way that we did at the state level. So that's where the National Craft Cannabis Coalition comes in, which I'm very happy to be involved with and be a part of. And the SHIP Act in particular, I want to make sure that we get to chat about that, which is a piece of federal legislation that was introduced by Representative Jared Huffman out from, the Emerald Triangle out there in California, Humboldt.
Oh, yeah, I just saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, and basically what it's focusing on is the ability for direct-to-consumer sales by small craft producers. So, interstate
across state
commerce.
lines, I thought.
Say again?
I thought it was across state lines.
Yeah, interstate commerce by consenting states. So what that would mean in the long term for Connecticut is that when we get to a point where everybody can get the license they want to get, and the craft producers are able to transition from legacy to the regulated side, if they choose to do that, they will be able to legally ship, anywhere if this were to pass following descheduling at the federal level. Where it matters right now for Connecticut patients is that we're stuck. We've had the same 4 licensed producers for as long as I've been a patient.
How long has the market, the medical program been running down there?
10 years and change, I think. And the real issue is that we've got 10 available licenses, but only 4 have ever been allocated because of the regulatory capture that exists down here and is so deeply ingrained into the medical market. So what this allows is for choice, right? I'm always an advocate for individual choice. I respect the agency of the individual to choose for themselves. And if a patient decides, you know what, Cureleaf, Verano, Green Thumb, and Theraplant / Green Rose, I'm all set with those. I know somebody in Maine who's got really great product that they put a lot of care into, and I would rather give them my business. This would allow patients to legally order that product from Maine through the mail without having to worry about getting caught or busted or anything, or what's going to happen. It becomes just a natural rhythm of interstate commerce for these small producers. And I think that's going to be so important going forward. So I would encourage anybody who agrees with that line of reasoning to contact your congressional reps, your United States House representatives, and ask them to support the SHIP Act. We need all the help we can get here, getting this thing over the line. And I appreciate you letting me come on to talk about it, because that's really, in my mind, that these kind of actions, these sorts of policy platforms and positions, we've got more in the works. So there's more to come. But if we're not out here actually doing it and trying to get out in front of the federal tidal wave, we are just going to get washed away, and the capture is going to be complete.
And Lou, that's what I've been saying. I've always, my entire life, ever since I was maybe 17 or 18, I've always thought that all drugs should be legal, hands down, until I got into this story. And the more I look at it, the more I'm looking around going, wow, like if they legalize weed right now, that's just going to be the final nail in the coffin for these small growers here in Vermont who still don't even have the fucking doors open on their dispensaries yet. Yeah,
the worst case scenario is, say Biden announces tomorrow, hey, we did it, it's done. That's when Amazon is in there like that, and forget it. It is already instantly game over. And this is one of the things that the Parabola Center, they just put out a paper, I believe, or a position statement on this notion of anti-monopolistic protections for small business being put into place prior to the stroke of that pen. Because if we don't do something like that, and shout out to Shalene and Parabola Center for making this good noise, because if those aren't in place, that tidal wave, that it's game over automatically. And that's not even to mention the other nightmare scenarios, like if it doesn't get descheduled but they reschedule it, like Schedule 2 or something, then that's big pharma's payday. That's when the entire country is regulatory capture. But even if it does get, fully descheduled, if we don't have protections in place for the small producers, the small growers and farmers, then yeah, it's Amazon Basics. You're going to see Amazon Basics weed, and that's going to be everywhere. And then once people realize how easy that is, that's just all they're going to do. So
and
we got to stop
probably.
that. We got to get out in front of that if we're going to make this a viable industry for the small fries, the mom and pops, the legacy person, the person who was affected directly by the war on drugs. We got to do something for these people. We can't just do something for the corporations. It's finally reaching a critical mass now, I think, on the national stage. There's a nationwide network of protests happening tomorrow around some of these issues. Home grow rights for all, release of all non-violent cannabis prisoners, and expungement of all related records. I mean, these are universal issues, no matter what market you're in. Even if you're in a state like Indiana that doesn't even have medical yet, you can get behind this. You can get behind the idea of home grow rights for all, because after all, it's more about freeing the plant. If, all the regulation that's in place, and, they call it legalization, but it's not. It's legal if you conform to the following rules and standards.
Legalization, but they're still
we're going to keep hitting you with the chopper. They're using police helicopters out here.
They're training. Vermont is training new drug recognition experts right now, and they're running them through these courses to basically the DUI test for cannabis is the exact same test they give you for a DUI. And that's another thing where they have absolutely no scientific basis for showing, like, alcohol is pretty reliable. You drink enough, you're going to start stumbling. I get smoked joints all day, dude. Like I'm going to be able to drive fine, but there's still, it's just, I thought it was just another reason for cops to fuck with people. And really all I wanted out of legalization was for the cops to leave me the fuck alone. And we couldn't even get that.
Not so much.
We had two cops on the advisory committee. One of them has a dispensary license now and is running for Senate.
God damn.
Yeah.
There was a big news story down here in the last few days about the state's flagship public university, the University of Connecticut, is now involved in impairment research. That's where they're putting the R&D money. Is we have to come up with a cannabis breathalyzer. We have to find a way to do this so that cops can really, do whatever they want to do. Like, seriously, you're bragging about this.
Right. Well, what does the number mean? So, like, you could take a breathalyzer, but, like, what does that number mean in a vacuum? It doesn't imply that you're impaired.
Yeah. And that's what the latent prohibitionist boomers are worried about. And that's why they're funding this research to be done at UConn instead of what should really be done, and actually probably can't be done until federal legalization happens. But really, we've already ceded so much cannabis R&D to other countries, like Israel, for example. And that's where all the big pharma investment is in terms of turning things into pills, turning the plant into pills. One story I want to I gotta jump at the top of the hour, but one thing I want to make sure I talk about real quick is there's a group called Connecticut Innovations, which is the state's quasi-public venture capital entity. So they take state money and they invest it with the goal of getting a return and somehow doing some good for the state in the process. During the run-up to the lottery system that we had here for licensing, at least the first round of the lottery, which, by the way, on retail application fees alone generated $15 million for the state.
Jesus
but
Christ.
This Connecticut Innovations, who the governor's wife, Annie Lamont, is directly involved with, just invested $1.25 million into a Colorado company called 1906. And 1906 makes cannabis pills that look like OxyContin. And they've been subject to a recall recently, a product recall that's been in the news. It's crazy. So 7 figures of Connecticut money flowing out the door to a Colorado company to help them get a leg up on the adult use market out here. And they defend the move. When journalists have asked, press them on it, they're like, oh, well, it's a good company. It's going to generate a good return. But what about using Connecticut money to build up Connecticut? You know what I mean? Instead of building up some other out-of-state corporation. This is what we're up against down here. And it goes all the way to the top. I think about situations like Fall River, Massachusetts, where the mayor was, taking bribes for cannabis licenses. And in a situation, just a municipal level situation like that, it took the FBI coming in over the top to get that dealt with. Now imagine a situation where it doesn't just go up to the municipal level, but it goes all the way to the governor's mansion. Are they really going to deploy the FBI against a Democratic governor right now? You know what I mean? I started thinking about these things. There's a lot, it's a run up to a critical midterm. There's a whole lot going on. The governor is on the ballot, this fall, and there is some competition. So it's interesting. It's a real interesting landscape, and to see all these kind of tentacles eventually converging and figuring out where everybody's coming from. It's mind blowing. And frankly, I don't know how people who have followed this for years and years have kept it all straight, because I feel like my head's going to explode sometimes.
I'm only like 8 months in, and my fucking head is spinning.
It's wild, man. It really is.
And boy, so some of the same, before you go, some of the same shit here up in Vermont, which is one thing that really dragged me into this story, was when I saw that all 5 of our medical licenses had been sold off to these out-of-state companies, and first of all, when they issued they issued 5 medical licenses in Vermont. It was whatever, 2012 or whenever it was back then. 2 of them went to one guy, 2 of them went to another lady, and then they added on a 5th one. So basically 3 people got to control the whole market. And then 2 of those were packaged up and sold to Slang. 2 of them were packaged up and sold to Curaleaf, and the other one was sold to Ianthus.
Convertibles, choo-choo.
It was funny because that Ianthus guy had to resign. Hadley Ford was his name. He had to resign from the board of his own company for taking $150,000 of investor funds for his personal expenses.
There is one more thing I want to make sure I get in here. It was just announced yesterday that they finally finished the first round of general lottery. So not social equity, but general lottery for retail and micro cultivator licenses down here. So this is a lottery where you can put in as many tickets as you can afford. And
what'd you say? It's like $3 million a pop?
$3 million for retail. Yeah. If you don't have a joint venture, it's a $3 million application. But I think at that point, it's really just pay to play.
But all the licenses are on lotteries.
It's so Byzantine. It's so complex. It would take me a while to explain it right here.
We'll have to do another hour.
It is mostly a lottery situation. The challenge is, though, the big thing is, well, we segmented the market the way we did so that we can prevent vertical integration, and dominance by certain parties and whatnot. And then in the same breath, they just gave retail and micro cultivator to the same applicant. And then they gave another retail to a different applicant with the same address. So it's so painfully obvious what's going on here. This is somebody in Arizona who Debbie's dispensary, Sarah's dispensary, like some fake folksy bullshit. I went to the website and it has this whole her life story, blah, 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 whatever. The point is, what happened to no vertical integration? You know what I mean? What happened to free market capitalism, letting the market decide? It's just regulatory capture. The state picks winners and losers, and that is the market we have down here. We do not have free market American capitalism. So you got to walk it like you talk it, and they're not willing to do that because they want, you told us we could tax and regulate it. We want our, 15 million alone in the slush fund, just from the retail applications, not even counting all the other license types. It's unbelievable, man. It's unbelievable.
It's kind of not.
Yeah.
It's kind of shaken out exactly the way I expected it to.
That's right.
Which I wish was not the case.
Yeah.
I would really like to be wrong more about stuff. It doesn't make me happy. Anyway, you said you got to go. You got any final words? I hope we could do this again sometime, because I got some more questions for you, Lou. But
100%, man. Hell, we could make this a series. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about. All I'll say is,
I always leave the last word for the guest. So take it away, and thank you for your time, man.
Yeah, appreciate it. Tomorrow, which depending on when you hear this, I'm talking about Saturday, September 24th, is nationwide day of protest for these issues that we've been talking about here in Connecticut. It's going to be in Middletown. You can find that information on my Instagram. The flyers are out there. You can DM me CTMMP data. I'll put you in touch with the organizers. And yeah, we're just looking for folks to show up and get some exposure to some of these issues and get some media coverage so that we can expand from the echo chamber to hitting as many new minds as possible. Because I think the big issue here is that a lot of folks don't know anything about any of this stuff. And it's time for us to start waking them up. Let's go. Let's do it.
That sounds like a great note to leave it on. Lou Rinaldi, National Craft Cannabis Coalition. Good luck with everything, man. And we'll definitely be in touch soon.
Right on. Peace. Thanks for having me.